For decades, men were trained to believe love is a mission, a relentless pursuit where devotion equals worth, where sacrifice is proof of character, and where being chosen is the final stamp that says you made it as a man. The story was simple: find a woman, prove yourself, build a life, carry the load, be steady, be useful, be needed. And if you do all of that long enough, you earn loyalty, peace, and a home that feels like rest. But in 2026, something quiet changed. Men didn't stop wanting connection. Men didn't suddenly become cold. Men didn't give up. What changed is more subtle and more important. Men stopped losing themselves to the chase. They stopped shrinking their identity to fit someone else's expectations. They stopped measuring their worth through another person's satisfaction. They stopped treating approval like oxygen, not because they hate love, but because they finally noticed what love was costing them: their peace, their focus, their freedom, their sense of self, and the very foundation that makes love meaningful in the first place. In this new reality, being alone is no longer automatically seen as failure. For a growing number of men, it has become a deliberate choice, an act of self respect, a boundary, a reset, a strategic season. Solitude stops being a punishment and starts being a tool. Silence stops being emptiness and starts being clarity. Because when you step back from the endless chase, you don't just lose noise, you gain space: space to heal, space to build, space to think, space to remember who you are when nobody is watching. And that creates something most men have never had long enough to develop: a life that belongs to them. This didn't happen overnight. It isn't just bitterness. It isn't just fear. It isn't just a trend. It's an awakening that took root slowly, somewhere between heartbreak, social pressure, modern dating chaos, and the private realization that constantly performing for love can hollow a man out. Men are not rejecting connection. They're rejecting imbalance. They're rejecting relationships that feel like a constant test. They're rejecting dynamics where effort is assumed, but respect is conditional. They're rejecting the idea that a man's value must be proven daily through sacrifice. And the men who understand this shift are quietly rewriting what fulfillment looks like in a world where the old rules no longer protect you. So the real question is not why are men becoming single? The question is, what happens when men stop chasing entirely? What happens when men stop auditioning for love? What happens when men start protecting their peace like it's a real asset? Because once that happens, the entire relationship market changes, and so does the man. Modern relationships can feel like a constant evaluation, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's subtle. Every conversation feels like it can be misread. Every gesture gets measured against an unspoken standard. Every date feels like it comes with invisible expectations you were never fully told, but you're still expected to meet. Men find themselves giving time, attention, and effort, then walking away feeling like it didn't land, feeling like it wasn't seen, feeling like it didn't count. Dating starts to resemble a job interview. You prepare, you present your best angles, you try to read signals, you try to predict outcomes, you manage tone, you manage timing, you manage perception. And even when you do it well, clarity is rare, emotional safety is rare, consistent appreciation is rare, effort becomes assumed, not valued. So men adjust, explain, and perform. They try to be more thoughtful, more emotionally aware, more communicative, more accommodating, more patient, and still, many of them end up feeling like nothing is ever enough. Even small moments carry weight. A text might be analyzed like evidence. A late reply can become a character flaw. A small misunderstanding can turn into a test of loyalty. A calm moment can get reinterpreted as distance. A simple boundary can get labeled as selfish. And men learn to navigate these waters carefully. They become hyper aware of triggers. They walk on eggshells, not because they're weak, but because they've learned how quickly peace can turn into conflict. They hope their intentions will be recognized, but too often, intention isn't what gets judged. The outcome is what gets judged. The feeling is what gets judged. And feelings, by nature, are unstable. Planning a date isn't just planning a date anymore. It can feel like predicting mood, avoiding landmines, trying to create the right experience, trying to pick the right place, trying to be confident without being arrogant, assertive without being pushy, charming without being performative, interesting without being too much, direct without being intense. And even if the date goes well, there's often a low level uncertainty afterward. Was she actually interested? Was she entertained? Did I say something wrong? Should I text now or later? Should I be more available or less? Should I lead more or ask more? It becomes mental labor, constant calibration, and the simplicity of a connection gets replaced by performance. Over time, this drains men, not in one big, dramatic collapse, in a slow leak, a steady erosion of patience, excitement, and self confidence. Men start noticing the cost, the stress, the fatigue, the quiet disappearance of peace, and eventually a choice shows up. It's not shouted, it's not announced, it's just felt. Step back or keep performing. Protect your peace or keep trading it. Stay in the chase or reclaim yourself. For many men, the answer becomes obvious. Real connection should not feel like constant pressure. Love should not require you to disappear to keep it. If it does, something is wrong. So men step back. And here's the part people misunderstand. Most men don't step back in a dramatic way. They don't slam doors. They don't swear off women forever. They don't go on a rage campaign. They simply stop overextending. They stop bleeding energy into places that don't return respect. They stop chasing. They pause. They observe. They conserve. They start treating their attention like a resource. Because it is. Initiating conversation starts to feel like a risk, not a reward. Planning dates starts to feel like a gamble. Offering reassurance starts to feel like feeding a demand that never ends. Trying to communicate better starts to feel like stepping into a trap, because sometimes the conversation isn't about understanding. Sometimes it's about power. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about emotional regulation being outsourced to you. And a lot of men are done carrying that. So silence becomes safer than explanation. Not because men have nothing to say, but because they've learned that speaking up can be punished. Express frustration and you're cold. Ask for respect and you're defensive. Set a boundary and you're emotionally unavailable. Say you're tired and you're not trying. Say you need space and you're pulling away. So men begin calculating every interaction, not to manipulate, to survive. They weigh effort against outcome. They ask quietly, is this worth my energy? Is this worth my time? Is this worth my peace? This withdrawal isn't apathy, it's protection. Men are learning that emotional overextension rarely buys security. And the more they give without reciprocal respect, the more patience erodes. So they choose stillness. They stop auditioning. They stop performing for approval. They stop chasing validation. In daily life, this looks familiar. Texts get shorter. Calls happen less. Plans get simpler. Men focus on routines that stabilize them instead of gestures that drain them. Not avoidance, selective engagement, participation only where the exchange respects boundaries. The change is subtle, but it's profound. The men who once pursued endlessly now watch quietly. They don't demand, they don't beg, they don't explain, they observe, and the dynamic shifts without anyone announcing it. Women feel the change even if they can't name it. The energy is different. The man is different. Because stepping back allows men to reclaim autonomy over their emotional space. It creates clarity where there was chaos, peace where there was performance, and it lays a foundation for real connection, but only if the connection is aligned. And once a man reaches that point, everything changes. Because a subtle shift happens when a man stops chasing. Attention is no longer the goal. Alignment becomes the measure. He stops asking, "Does she notice me?" He starts asking, "Does this fit my life?" He stops asking, "How do I keep her?" He starts asking, "Should I even bring her into my world?" That internal shift changes everything. Choices are no longer made to impress. They're made to protect clarity, purpose, and self-respect. Calm becomes a form of confidence, not the loud confidence that needs to prove something. The quiet confidence that comes from not needing approval. There is no urgency in movement, no desperation in words. Presence communicates more than effort ever could. Men discover that restraint has power, that energy becomes magnetic when it isn't scattered, that a man who doesn't need to be chosen becomes difficult to control. And control is what many modern dynamics quietly revolve around. When a man stops chasing, he stops being an applicant in someone else's life. He becomes a filter. He chooses where to invest time, emotion, and energy, not out of arrogance, out of stewardship. Because time is finite, energy is finite, life is finite. And a man who wastes those things ends up resentful. So he learns to invest wisely. Daily life reflects this shift. Invitations are considered, not accepted reflexively. Conversations become purposeful, not performative. Boundaries become normal, not negotiable. He doesn't over-explain. He doesn't argue his right to exist. He doesn't beg for respect. He expects it. And if it's not there, he leaves. Not with drama. With calm. Because calm is a sign of power. A man who can walk away without rage is a man who is not controlled by his hunger. And hunger is what makes men accept bad deals. Loneliness, sexual hunger, validation hunger, the hunger to be seen, the hunger to feel chosen. When that hunger runs your life, you become easy to manipulate. When you master it, you become free. This is the paradox of modern masculinity. The less a man tries to be wanted, the more he is noticed. The less he chases, the more he becomes magnetic. Not because women love games, because grounded energy stands out in a world full of desperation. A man who isn't trying to sell himself is rare. A man who is stable in his own company is rare. A man who doesn't need you is different, and difference creates curiosity. So attraction begins to follow a new rhythm, not driven by constant pursuit, driven by alignment. Now let's talk about solitude, because it's misunderstood. Most people hear alone and think lonely. They picture emptiness. They picture sadness. They picture failure. But solitude, for a disciplined man, is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is pain. Solitude is space. Loneliness is being alone and needing someone to fix it. Solitude is being alone and using it. And that difference is everything. In solitude, a man reclaims a control of his time and energy. Mornings become quiet, not rushed, not negotiated, not shaped by someone else's mood. Weekends become his again, not split between obligations and emotional management. They become opportunities to reset, reflect, build, and breathe. Every decision is guided by alignment, not approval. And that isn't selfishness, it's stewardship. Because a man who doesn't steward his own life will end up living inside someone else's. And many men are done doing that. Financial independence becomes part of that autonomy. Money stops being a way to impress. It becomes a tool to preserve freedom, to explore interests, to build stability, to reduce dependence, to create options. And options are power. When you don't need to chase a relationship for security, you can choose a relationship for quality. That is a higher standard, and higher standards change outcomes. Silence also changes. It stops being a void. It becomes a laboratory. Time alone lets thoughts settle. Priorities sharpen. Internal strength grows. Men notice their patterns. They notice what drains them. They notice what triggers them. They notice what they've been tolerating. They notice what they truly want. In solitude, reflection replaces distraction. Discipline replaces chaos. And when a man practices this long enough, peace becomes consistent, not something he visits occasionally, something he lives inside. Emotional stability becomes practiced, refined, protected, and from that stability, presence changes. A man stops moving through the world seeking validation. He moves with deliberation, with calm satisfaction, with quiet authority. Solitude becomes an investment in self mastery, in clarity over chaos, in a life built by intention instead of pressure. This is why alone stops meaning lonely. It starts meaning free. And once a man experiences that kind of freedom, it becomes very hard to sell him a relationship that feels like stress. He won't buy it because he knows what peace feels like, and peace is addictive in the best way. Now we need to talk about the hardest teacher in this entire conversation: divorce. Because divorce is not just a breakup. For many men, it's a structural earthquake. People talk about the emotional loss, the companionship, the shared plans, the familiar routine. But the deeper impact is logistical and identity based. Homes that once felt stable become fragmented. Schedules become dictated by legal agreements. Even time with children. Time that should feel natural becomes measured, scheduled, conditional. A man who tied his identity to partnership suddenly faces a brutal question: who am I when I'm not husband? Who am I when I'm not performing stability for someone else? Who am I when I'm alone with my own choices? Then there are finances, divided assets, obligations, lawyers, court dates, the cold math of splitting a life you built, and the strange reality that in many cases, the man who worked to provide stability becomes the one paying for instability. And whether anyone admits it or not, divorce teaches men something modern culture rarely teaches honestly. Love does not always protect you. Effort does not guarantee loyalty. Sacrifice does not guarantee respect. And the more you ignore that, the more vulnerable you become. So many men come out of divorce with the same conclusion, even if they say it differently. Peace is easier to maintain alone than in a partnership that no longer aligns. Solitude becomes sanctuary, not because they hate women, because they learned the cost of imbalance. They learned how expensive it is to compromise your identity to keep a relationship alive. They learned what it feels like to give, then be treated like you were never enough. And once you learn that lesson the hard way, you don't forget it. Rebuilding after divorce is not going backward, it's recalibration. It's rebuilding a structure that belongs to you. Mornings without conflict, evenings without negotiation, weekends that are yours, financial decisions made for growth, not approval, boundaries that aren't begged for but enforced. This rebuilding is slow and disciplined. It's not flashy, but it creates something durable, self trust. And self trust is what many men lost inside the relationship. Because when you repeatedly compromise your own instincts to keep peace, you teach yourself not to listen to yourself. Divorce, for some men, becomes the moment they stop doing that. They become more selective afterward, not because they're scared, because they're awake. They understand the structural cost of choosing wrong. And once you understand that, you stop chasing love like it's a prize. You start evaluating love like it's a contract, not coldly, wisely, because contracts have consequences, and men live with consequences. Now step back and observe the world. Patterns emerge. Men who embrace intentional solitude often report higher contentment, not because they're better, because autonomy stabilizes the nervous system. Clarity reduces anxiety. Control over your time and money reduces stress. A life built around purpose creates satisfaction that doesn't depend on external validation. Meanwhile, people who measure worth through constant approval tend to feel more volatile. Because approval is unstable, it changes with moods, it changes with attention, it changes with novelty. You can't build a stable identity on something that fluctuates daily. So independence becomes not just a lifestyle choice, but a protective mechanism, a way to preserve mental health while building strength. But there's another important layer. Modern love often falters, not because of indifference, but because men and women frequently operate on different emotional wavelengths. Men often approach problems through structure, logic, and solutions. They want stability, they want clarity, they want peace. Women often approach connection through feeling, resonance, and emotional presence. They want understanding, they want depth, they want emotional safety. Neither approach is wrong, but when these approaches clash without translation, both sides suffer. A man's calm can be interpreted as distance. A man's silence can be interpreted as avoidance. A man's focus can be interpreted as neglect. A man's boundary can be interpreted as rejection. So men learn that sometimes the safest move is to withdraw, not because they don't care, because they're tired of being misunderstood, tired of being punished for being stable, tired of being required to perform emotional labor that never ends. Women may interpret that withdrawal as emotional absence, but for many men, it's simply self preservation. They are not abandoning connection, they are recalibrating it. They are learning that meaningful engagement requires alignment, not endless compromise. Without translation, even good intentions become friction. So men step back to protect peace and regain clarity. Not because love is bad, because misalignment is expensive. And when men step back at scale, the ripple effects go beyond dating. Communities change, families change. Younger men observe it. Men in their 20s and 30s increasingly question traditional milestones: marriage, legacy, lifelong commitment. Not because they're lazy, because they've watched the cost of getting it wrong. They've seen fathers, brothers, and friends crushed by dynamics that were sold as just part of being a man. They've watched men overextend emotionally and financially, then get discarded when their value was no longer convenient. So they become cautious, not cynical, strategic. And that strategy reshapes society because societies rely on men who contribute not just labor, but presence, guidance, stewardship. When men withdraw, a vacuum forms. The question is whether society adapts intelligently or keeps shaming men back into contracts that don't protect them. If the shift is recognized, it can create a healthier balance. Men participate willingly instead of reluctantly. Men commit intentionally instead of blindly. Men build families from strength instead of fear. That's not a crisis, that's evolution. Legacy also changes in this new model. For a long time, legacy was defined by tradition: marriage, children, inheritance, the normal script. But more men are realizing that lasting impact doesn't require social approval. It requires contribution, creation, mentorship, stability, work that outlives attention. Men who step back from draining dynamics often redirect energy into building things that endure: businesses, skills, art, ideas, communities, mentorship. They leave marks that are tangible and self directed. They stop chasing validation and start creating value. And that is a powerful shift because fulfillment becomes internal, not dependent on being chosen, not dependent on constant external confirmation. A man becomes defined by what he builds and who he becomes, not by whether someone approved of him. That doesn't mean relationships are worthless. It means relationships stop being the only measure of a life. By the time men reach their 30s and 40s, solitude can take on a new dimension. It stops feeling like absence. It starts feeling like leverage. Years spent cultivating discipline, clarity, and autonomy compound. Emotional maturity grows. Financial stability grows. And with stability comes confidence. Not loud confidence, calm confidence. The kind that makes you selective. Not fearful, selective. Because you finally understand what drains you. You finally understand what nourishes you. You didn't learn that through theory. You learned it through experience. You learned it through pain. You learned it through rebuilding. So intimacy becomes intentional. Connection becomes evaluated through peace, respect, and shared values. Drama becomes unattractive. Performative relationships lose their appeal. And the pressure of social timelines fades. Men move with purpose, not urgency. They invest time where it matters. They stop racing to meet someone else's expectations. They start building a life they respect. And that life becomes both grounded and magnetic. Not because they're trying to attract, because they're stable. This is the truth most people miss. Men did not stop loving. They did not abandon connection. They did not retreat because they are afraid. What changed is that many men began to love wisely. Experience replaced fantasy. Reflection replaced performance. Peace became the measure, not approval. Clarity became the filter. Love stopped being about filling a void. It became about alignment, respect, mutual nourishment, a partnership that enhances life instead of consuming identity. Men who embrace this shift understand something simple. Their time is finite. Their energy is finite. Their presence is valuable. So they stop surrendering themselves to chaos disguised as passion. They stop negotiating dignity for attention. They stop trading peace for temporary validation. And they start moving with calm authority, grounded presence, deliberate intention. They become harder to trigger, harder to shame, harder to manipulate. Not because they are cold, because they are centered. Solitude becomes a classroom, a space that strengthens insight, patience, resilience. It prepares men for connection that is healthy rather than transactional, supportive rather than draining. It teaches a man how to love without losing himself. And that is the quiet revolution. Not less love, better love. Not rejection, discernment. Not bitterness, standards. Not emptiness, freedom. So if you're watching this and you feel that shift in yourself, understand what it is. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not failing. You're waking up. You're realizing that a life built around constant pursuit is not a life built around peace. You're realizing that love without self-respect becomes self-erasure. You're realizing that connection should not require you to disappear, and you're choosing something better. A life where your identity remains intact. A life where your peace is protected. A life where you don't chase approval like it's oxygen. A life where you only commit where alignment exists. A life where solitude is not a punishment, but a foundation. A life where love becomes a choice, not a need. And in 2026, that might be the most powerful shift a man can make.